Anwen had not planned on wearing a dead queen's ring tonight. She had not planned on standing in the Alpha King's private chambers with her pulse hammering so hard she could taste copper at the back of her throat. And she had certainly, absolutely, not planned on having the most feared shifter in the known world, watching her from the far side of the room with an expression that couldn't decide between fascination and fury. But here she was. The covenant ring sat on the fourth finger of her left hand, like it had always been there, warm gold, impossibly smooth, humming against her skin with a low, steady vibration she could feel in her teeth. It had not come off. She had pulled, twisted, yanked, until her knuckle turned white and her eyes watered. It had not budged. The king had not spoken since the guards brought her in. He stood near the window, arms folded across his chest, his silhouette carved from the last copper light of sunset bleeding through the glass. King Kydric Ashenmere, the Wolf of Dunmeryn, the man who had torn through the Greymark Rebellion with his bare hands and emerged, with a crown of bone and a reputation that preceded him like a storm front. He was taller than the stories suggested, broader, the kind of frame that made a room feel smaller just by being inside it, and he was staring at her. Anwen stared back because looking away felt like it might kill her faster than meeting his eyes. His gaze was the gray of wet stone, heavy and unblinking, and she had the crawling sensation that he could see straight through her skin to every terrified thought skittering around behind her ribs. She swallowed hard. The ring hummed. 4 hours ago, Anwen had been in the lower archives, elbow-deep in census ledgers that smelled like dust and mouse droppings, living her perfectly ordinary, perfectly invisible life. Senior Archivist Dunmore had shoved a stack of sealed documents into her arms and told her to deliver them to Counselor Voss in the Great Hall. Simple. 10 minutes there, 10 minutes back, then an evening of cataloging grain shipment records from the eastern provinces. She had not known about the covenant ceremony. She had not known that every unwed noblewoman of rank within 5 territories had been summoned to Dunmeryn. She had not known that the ancient covenant ring, dormant for 3 generations, had been brought out of the royal vault on the recommendation of the king's council as a last measure to identify his fated mate. She had walked into the great hall carrying documents and walked out wearing a relic. It happened fast. The hall was vast, filled with perfume and silk and the brittle tension of 30 women trying not to look desperate. Anwen had skirted the edges, head down, looking for Counselor Voss. She found him near the front, seated beside the raised dais where the candidates stood in a gleaming line, each one more beautiful and polished than the last. Anwen, in her ink-stained work dress with archive dust on her sleeves, handed him the documents and turned to leave. The ring was on a velvet cushion, being carried between candidates by a court attendant. Each woman slid it on. Each time, nothing happened. No glow, no warmth, no sign of recognition from the ancient gold. The attendant moved down the line with mechanical patience. One of the candidates, a tall woman with dark hair and an emerald gown that caught the chandelier light, pulled the ring off with a frustrated snap of her wrist and dropped it back on the cushion. It bounced. Anwen watched it arc off the velvet in a slow, impossible tumble and reflexively reached out to catch it before it hit the stone floor. Her fingers closed around it. The gold flared white-hot. Light erupted from her fist, blazing through the gaps between her fingers, throwing wild shadows across the vaulted ceiling. Every head in the hall turned. Anwen opened her hand. The ring sat in her palm, glowing like a trapped star. Then it moved. She would swear on her life, it moved on its own, sliding forward across her skin and slipping onto her finger with a click she felt in her bones. The glow deepened, from white to gold, warm and steady, pulsing in rhythm with her heartbeat. The silence in the great hall was the loudest thing Anwen had ever heard. Then the whispers came, crashing in from every direction. She heard impossible and commoner and something sharper, something venomous, from the dark-haired woman in emerald. Anwen grabbed the band and pulled. It did not move. She twisted, wrenched, clawed at it with her other hand. Nothing. It sat flush against her skin like it had fused with her. She looked up, breathing hard, and found the king on his feet. He had been seated on the far side of the dais, observing the ceremony with the detached patience of a man enduring something tedious. He was not detached now. He was standing, his full height, casting a shadow halfway across the hall, and he was looking at her with an intensity that made the air feel thin. Nobody moved. The king's beta, a lean, sharp-featured man named Tavian, was the first to reach her. He gripped her elbow with a hand that brooked no argument and guided her away from the stunned crowd, through a side corridor, and up 3 flights of stairs she would not remember climbing. He stopped before the carved oak doors of the king's private chambers and pushed them open. "Wait inside," he said, his voice carefully emptied of inflection. "The king will decide what happens next." And now here she was, waiting. While the king decided what to do with an archivist who had accidentally stolen his dead mother's ring, and possibly his entire political future. A girl who had been left on the castle steps as an infant and raised in its lowest corridors, who owned nothing of value and belonged to no one of consequence, and who was now wearing the most important artifact in the kingdom on her left hand. The last of the sunlight slipped below the window. The room dimmed, Cadric moved, and the motion made Anwen flinch, but he only crossed to the desk and struck a match. Candlelight bloomed across his features, carving hollows beneath his cheekbones that hadn't been visible in the dying daylight. Up close, in this softer glow, she could see what the distance and the ceremony's grandeur had hidden. The bruised crescents beneath his eyes, the pallor beneath his bronze skin, the way his jaw was clenched so tight a muscle twitched beneath his ear. The king looked exhausted. No. The king looked ill. "You have until dawn," he said. His voice was lower than she had expected, quieter, rougher at the edges, like a man who had not spoken in days and had forgotten how it was supposed to sound smooth. The words landed between them like stones dropped into still water. Anwen blinked. "Until dawn." "To do what, Your Majesty?" Something shifted in his expression. Not quite amusement, not quite pain. "To prove the ring chose correctly." It warmed once, gold and steady, as if agreeing with him. She had absolutely no idea how to do that. The first hour passed in silence. Cadric returned to the window and stood with his back to her, a wall of tension between his shoulder blades that made Anwen's own spine ache in sympathy. She had been directed to a chair near the fireplace by a gesture so minimal she almost missed it. The fire had been lit, though not well. It crackled, with the uncertain enthusiasm of wood that was slightly too green, throwing more smoke than heat into the room. Anwen sat with her hands folded in her lap, the ring warm against her thigh, and tried to make herself as small as possible. She was good at that. 23 years of being no one in particular had made her an expert in the art of not being noticed. She had spent her whole life in the castle's margins, a foundling raised by the kitchens and claimed by the archives, learning early that invisible meant safe. She could disappear into a room, the way ink disappears into water, quietly, completely, without anyone registering she had ever been there, but the ring made that impossible. Tonight, its steady glow cast a faint halo around her left hand, and every time she shifted in the chair, the light caught the king's attention. She saw his shoulders tighten each time. He hated this. She could feel it radiating off him like heat off sun-baked stone. Whatever the covenant ceremony was supposed to accomplish, this was not the outcome he had wanted. 30 noble women, with bloodlines that could be traced back centuries, and the ring had chosen a girl who catalogued grain shipments for a living. "I should apologize," Anwen said, because the silence was going to kill her before the king got the chance. He didn't turn. "For what?" "For catching the ring. I should have let it fall." Now, he turned. The candlelight caught his eyes and turned them silver at the edges, and the weight of his attention settled on her like a hand pressing down on her shoulders. "You think the covenant ring would have shattered on a stone floor?" he asked. "I think it would have been someone else's problem," Anwen said. The corner of his mouth did something. Not a smile. The ghost of a consideration of a smile, quickly killed. He turned back to the window. Another silence, longer this time. Anwen counted the cracks in the hearthstones. She counted the candles on the desk. She counted her own breaths and ran out of patience somewhere around breath number 47. "Your Majesty, what exactly am I supposed to be proving?" she asked. "The bond," Kadric said without turning. "Right, the bond. And how does one prove a bond? Is there a test? A questionnaire? Do I need to lift something heavy?" He turned again slowly, and this time the ghost of that consideration of a smile lasted half a heartbeat longer. "The covenant ring responds to proximity," he said. "If the bond is genuine, the ring will show signs as the night progresses. Changes in its light, its warmth, its resonance. The scholars who studied it believe the ring amplifies the mate connection when both parties are in close quarters." "And if nothing happens by dawn?" Anwen asked, already knowing the answer. "Then the ring chose wrong, and we find a way to remove it." Anwen nodded slowly. "And if something does happen?" The silence that followed was a different kind, heavier, charged with something she couldn't name. "Then we have a much larger problem," Kaedric said quietly. Anwen did not find that reassuring. The second hour was worse. Kadric sat at his desk and read through correspondence with the focused intensity of a man trying very hard to pretend there wasn't a stranger glowing faintly by his fireplace. Anwen watched the fire and tried to think calming thoughts. She failed, completely. The ring had grown warmer since they'd been in the room together. Not uncomfortably so, but noticeably. A steady, spreading heat that had crept from her finger up to her wrist, like a vine climbing a wall. She wondered if she should mention it. She decided against it. Telling the king that his dead mother's ring was slowly heating up on her hand felt like the kind of conversation that could only end badly. She watched him instead, carefully, in small, stolen glances that she hoped he wouldn't notice. He was reading, or trying to. His pen hovered over a document, but she hadn't seen him write a single word in 20 minutes. His fingers had a tremor, slight, barely visible, but there. His left hand, the one not holding the pen, was gripping the edge of the desk hard enough that his knuckles had gone white. Something was wrong. Not wrong, like frustrated with an unwanted archivist in his chambers. Wrong. Wrong like something inside him was fighting to get out, or fighting to stay in. Anwen watched his pen hand shake, watched him set the pen down carefully, and press both palms flat against the desk. Watched his eyes close and his breathing go deliberately slow and deep. He was controlling something, managing it. With the practiced discipline of a man who had been doing this for a long time and was running out of strength, when his eyes opened, they were different. Not gray anymore. For one stuttering heartbeat, they were gold. Pure, burning, animal gold that caught the candlelight and threw it back in a way that human eyes should not have been able to do. The gold lasted less than a second. Then it was gone, swallowed back behind the wet stone gray, and Kaedric blinked like a man surfacing from deep water. His gaze found hers. Anwen realized she had stopped breathing. "What did you see?" he asked, and his voice was wrong too. Rough, splintered. The voice of a man standing on the edge of something he was terrified of falling into. Anwen's mouth opened. No sound came out. The ring on her finger blazed. Not warm anymore. Hot. Burning light that threw shadows across the walls and painted the ceiling in shifting patterns. Anwen gasped and grabbed her wrist, staring down at the ring as its glow intensified to something almost blinding. Kadric was on his feet. His chair hit the floor behind him. He was across the room in 3 strides, and before Anwen could react, his hand closed around hers. The ring went silent. Not dim, not fading, silent. The glow simply stopped, replaced by a warmth so deep and steady it felt like holding her hand over a heartbeat. The tremor in his fingers stopped. The tension in his jaw released so suddenly, she saw the moment it happened, saw the breath he let out, like a man who had been holding it for hours, days, longer. They stood like that, his hand wrapped around hers, the ring humming softly between their palms, and the room went very, very still. Kadric looked down at their joined hands, then up at her face. His expression was impossible to read, but something in his eyes, behind the control, behind the walls, was afraid. "Sit down," Anwen said softly, because she didn't know what else to say, and he looked like he was about to fall. Not in the chair. On the floor, his back against the stone wall, his head tipped back. He didn't let go of her hand. Anwen lowered herself beside him, carefully, slowly, like approaching something wild. The ring thrummed between their palms. His breathing was evening out, deep and steady now, and up close, she could see the full extent of what the ceremony and the candlelight had hidden. He wasn't just tired, he was gaunt. The hollows in his cheeks were deeper than shadows. His skin had a grayish undertone beneath the bronze, and the bruises under his eyes looked like they had been there for weeks, months. "Your Majesty," she said carefully, "how long have you been sick?" His eyes opened. The gray was back, but softer now, edged with something she could almost mistake for vulnerability. "I am not sick," he said. "Your hands were shaking. Your eyes just turned gold. You look like you haven't slept in a month." Anwen paused. "That isn't what not sick looks like." Kadric stared at her. She waited for the anger. The dismissal. The cold, royal shutdown. She had seen him deploy in the Great Hall when an advisor pressed too hard. Instead, he said, "It's my wolf." Anwen went still. "He's going quiet," Kadr continued, and the words came out like they had been locked behind his teeth for too long and were grateful to finally leave fading. "I can barely reach him anymore," he swallowed, his throat working. "When I shift, it takes everything I have. 2 months ago, I stopped being able to shift completely. The gold in my eyes, that's him, fighting to surface, failing." The room felt colder. "What happens if he goes completely?" Anwen whispered. Kadric's hand tightened around hers. "Then I die," he said. "An alpha without his wolf does not survive. The body rejects itself. It has already started." He paused. "No one knows, except Tavian and the court healer. If the court finds out the king cannot shift, the territories will fracture within a week." Anwen sat beside the most powerful man in the kingdom, his hand in hers, a dying wolf behind his eyes, and felt the full, crushing weight of what the covenant ring had dragged her into. "So the ceremony," she said slowly. "It wasn't tradition. No, it was a last resort." His silence was answer enough. The ring warmed between their palms, steady and sure, like a second heartbeat, like a promise or a warning. The clock on the mantel read 10:30 when Koedric finally let go of her hand. He stood in one fluid motion, the brief vulnerability from the floor already sealed behind something harder, and crossed to the sideboard where a pitcher of water sat beside 2 cups. He poured one without offering her the other, drank it in 3 long swallows, and set the cup down with a deliberate click that said the conversation about his wolf was over. Anwen stayed on the floor, her back against the wall, the ring dimmer now but still warm. She understood the withdrawal. She had just seen something no one was meant to see. The most dangerous alpha in existence had sat on his own floor and told an archivist his wolf was dying. The shame of it was probably eating him alive. "You should try to sleep," she offered. He gave her a look that could have frozen a river in midsummer. "I was not aware archivists dispensed medical advice. I catalog grain shipments," Anwen said. "I also have eyes. You look like death warmed over and then frozen again." The silence that followed had a texture to it. Not anger, exactly. Something closer to bewilderment, like he was not accustomed to being spoken to without ceremony and had no ready protocol for it. "Where did they find you?" he muttered, almost to himself. "The lower archives. 3rd, sublevel. It smells like mice." He turned away. but not fast enough to hide the way his mouth twitched. Tavian arrived at the door 10 minutes later with a bedroll and a thin blanket that had clearly been pulled from a servant's closet. He set them near the fireplace without ceremony. "For the trial," Tavian said, his voice neutral enough to sound wood. He glanced at Anwen, then at the king. Whatever he saw pass between them made him add more quietly, "The council is waiting for a report at dawn." "Then they'll wait," Kadric said. Tavian gave a barely perceptible nod and withdrew, pulling the door shut behind him. The lock did not click. Small mercy, Anwen supposed, though she wasn't sure if the unlocked door was for her benefit or the king's. She stood and crossed to the bedroll, kneeling to unroll it on the stone floor near the hearth. The fire had been dying. She added a log from the stack, poked at the embers until they caught, and felt the warmth bloom against her face. Behind her, the king had not moved. "You're staring at me," Anwen said, without turning around. A pause. "The ring." She looked down. The band had brightened again, just slightly. A soft shimmer that responded to the fire's flicker, or to her heartbeat. She was no longer sure which. "It's been doing that since I sat down," she said. "It responds to emotional proximity," Kaedric said, and the clinical tone was back, the wall rebuilt. "Physical closeness increases the resonance, but emotional vulnerability accelerates it faster." Anwen turned to look at him. "Is that from the scholar's research or from personal observation?" He didn't answer, which was answer enough. She settled onto the bedroll, pulling the thin blanket over her legs. The stone floor was brutal even through the padding, and she could already feel the cold seeping through. She would not sleep tonight. Not on this floor, not in this room, not with the king of the realms 6 feet away battling a dying wolf inside his own body. But she tried. She closed her eyes and listened to the fire. Listened to the clock tick. Listened to Kaedric's breathing, which was too controlled to be natural, the deliberate rhythm of a man forcing himself calm. 20 minutes of silence. "Your name," Kaedric said. "They told me, but I have forgotten." Anwen opened her eyes. He was sitting on the edge of his bed now, boots still on, jacket still buttoned, rigid as a man awaiting sentencing. "Anwen," she said. "Anwen," he repeated, and the sound of her name in his voice did something strange to the space between her ribs, like a key turning in a lock she hadn't known was there. The ring flared bright enough to cast her shadow on the wall behind her. They both looked at it, then at each other. "That was the name," Anwen said quickly. "Not anything else. Just the name. People say names all the time." Kaedric's expression suggested he was unconvinced. Another silence. Anwen pulled the blanket higher and stared at the ceiling, tracing the cracks in the stone with her eyes. She could sense him across the room the way you feel a storm building on the horizon, a pressure change, a heaviness in the air that had nothing to do with weather. "How long?" she asked the ceiling. "Since your wolf started fading." The clock ticked 11 times before he answered. 8 months. Anwen closed her eyes. 8 months of hiding this. 8 months of a king pretending his wolf was whole while his body turned on itself. 8 months of no one to tell, no one to help, nothing but the slow, private horror of feeling the most fundamental part of himself go dark. "That must have been very lonely," she said. She hadn't meant to say it. The words just fell out, honest and unguarded, and the moment they hit the air, she wanted to pull them back. "You did not tell kings they were lonely. You did not name the thing they were most afraid of and lay it bare in a room where they were already exposed." But the silence that followed wasn't angry. It was the silence of someone who had been punched in the chest and was waiting for the pain to arrive. "My wolf used to keep me company," Kaedric said, and his voice cracked on the last word. Just a hairline fracture, barely audible, sealed immediately with a controlled breath. But Anwen heard it, and the ring heard it too, because it blazed so bright the room turned amber for a full 3 seconds. Anwen sat up. The light faded slowly, settling back to its warm, steady rhythm. But something in the room had shifted. The air felt different. Charged the way it feels before the first snow, when everything goes quiet and holds its breath. "Tell me about him," Anwen said. "Your wolf." Kaidrik looked at her like she had asked him to remove his own skin. "No one has ever asked me that," he said. "Then it's overdue." Another pause, this one long enough to swallow whole. Then, slowly, like a man stepping onto ice he wasn't sure would hold, the king began to talk. His wolf's name was Ashenmane. He had been with Kaidrik since his 14th year, fierce and proud and territorial in a way that verged on absurd. He used to pace beneath Kaidrik's consciousness like a caged flame, restless and hungry, and always, always watching. When Kaidrik was young, Ashenmane had been wild, uncontrollable. He had once shifted mid-council meeting because a visiting lord had raised his voice at Kaidrik's mother. He had once run through the Dunmarin forest for 6 hours straight during a thunderstorm, because the thunder made him feel alive. Now he was quiet, still. A presence that Kaidrik could barely sense, like a candle guttering at the far end of a vast dark hall. "I reach for him, and there's nothing," Kaidrik said, and the clinical tone was gone. Just a man, sitting on the edge of his bed in the dark, mourning something that was still technically alive, but felt like it was already gone. I call and he doesn't answer. And every day the silence gets wider. Anwen's eyes burned. She blinked hard and looked down at the ring. Its glow had steadied into something deep and constant, the color of autumn light through amber glass, and the warmth had spread from her hand all the way up her arm to settle behind her ribs. "Maybe he's not gone," she said. "Maybe he's just waiting." "For what?" Kaidrik asked. Anwen didn't have an answer, but the ring brightened once, sure and certain like it did. The clock read midnight when it happened. Kaidrik had gone quiet, his head resting against the bedpost, his eyes half closed in the posture of a man who was not sleeping but had surrendered the effort of staying fully alert. Anwen had been watching the fire burn low, her own eyes heavy, when she heard it, a sound. Low, guttural, wrong. She turned and saw Kaidrik doubled over on the edge of the bed, his hands fisted in the sheets, his shoulders shaking. His breathing had gone ragged, each exhale punctuated by a sound that was not quite human, a growl that vibrated through the floor and into her bones. "Your Majesty." Anwen scrambled to her feet. His head snapped up, and his eyes were gold again. Not the brief flicker from earlier, solid, burning, animal gold that swallowed his irises entirely and reflected the firelight like mirrors. Vines stood out in his neck and forearms, dark against his skin, pulsing with something that moved too fast to be blood. Ashenmane. His wolf was fighting to surface, and it was tearing Kaidrik apart from the inside. Anwen watched in horror as his hands clenched and released, his body rigid and trembling, caught between two forms with the strength to complete neither. A sound ripped from his throat that was half roar, half howl, and the anguish in it cracked her open. She didn't think. She crossed the room and grabbed his hands. The ring detonated. Light flooded the chamber, pouring from the band on her finger like liquid fire, racing up her arms and across her skin and leaping to his. Everywhere the light touched, the dark veins receded. The trembling eased. The horrible half-shift that had been wrenching his body apart simply stopped, like a hand had reached inside him and pressed a palm against a wound to hold the blood in. Kaidrik gasped. His eyes flickered gold, to gray, to gold, to gray, and then settled back to gray. The wolf retreated. The tension drained from his body so quickly he slumped forward, and Anwen caught him, his forehead dropping against her shoulder, his breathing ragged and wet against her collarbone. She held him. Held this enormous, terrifying, fragile man, while he shook against her and the ring sang between them, with a light so steady it felt like the only sure thing in the room. "It's all right," she whispered, even though she had no idea if that was true. "I've got you." His hands found her waist. Not grabbing, just resting there like he needed to know she was solid. Real, not going anywhere. Minutes passed. His breathing steadied, the trembling stopped, the ring dimmed to its familiar warm pulse, and the room settled back into shadow and firelight. Kaidrik pulled back slowly, and Anwen let him go. though something behind her ribs protested the loss of contact with a sharpness that startled her. He wouldn't look at her. His jaw was set, a flush crawling up his neck, and she could see the mortification setting in like frost. That, he said, his voice scraped raw, was not supposed to happen. How often does it happen? Anwen asked. He didn't answer. Your Majesty, how often? Every night, he said to the floor. Sometimes twice. Anwen stared at him. Every night. Every single night, this man went through that alone. No one to hold his hands, no one to anchor him. Just the slow, private agony of a wolf trying to live, and a body trying not to tear itself apart in the process. You should have told someone, she said, and her voice came out fiercer than she intended. I told Tavian. Tavian cannot hold your hands and make it stop. The words hung between them. Kadrick's gaze lifted to hers, and, for one unguarded moment, she saw it. Not the king, not the wolf. Just a man who was desperately, terribly, tired of being in pain alone. The ring answered once between them. Warm, steady, sure. Then the moment passed, and his walls came back up, and the king cleared his throat, and straightened, and became unreachable again. You should sleep, he said. Dawn is not far off. Anwen returned to her bedroll, her legs unsteady, her hands still tingling where they had touched his skin. She lay down in the dying firelight, and stared at the ceiling, and listened to him breathe, and did not sleep at all. But across the room, sometime after the clock struck 2, the king's breathing changed, deepened, slowed. The rigid line of his silhouette against the window softened, his head tilting slightly to one side. He was asleep, and the ring on Anwen's finger glowed like a small, warm sun, steady and bright and full of something that felt dangerously like hope. Dawn came with a verdict. Tavian arrived at the king's chambers, precisely as the first gray light touched the window. He knocked twice, waited 3 seconds, and entered to find Anwen cross-legged on her bedroll near the hearth, and the king seated at his desk, fully dressed, looking more rested than Tavian had seen him in months. Neither of them was looking at the other, which told Tavian everything he needed to know. The council is assembled, the beta said carefully. Tell them the trial was inconclusive, Kadrick said. Anwen's head snapped up. Inconclusive. Kadrick did not look at her. The ring responded to proximity, but that could be attributed to heightened emotion during an unfamiliar situation. We need more time to determine whether the bond is genuine. More time, Tavian repeated, his gaze flicking between them. Extend the arrangement. She stays in these chambers until we have definitive proof one way or the other. Anwen opened her mouth to argue, to point out that the ring had lit up the room like a bonfire, and his wolf had calmed under her hands, and the proof was as definitive as proof could possibly get. But Kadrick's jaw was set in that way. She was beginning to recognize the way that meant the conversation was a wall, and he was on the other side of it. Tavian gave a slow nod. I will inform the council. He paused at the door. How long? As long as it takes, Kadrick said. And so it continued. The days fell into a pattern that felt like putting on someone else's life, and finding it fit better than expected. During the daylight hours, Anwen returned to the lower archives. She shelved ledgers, transcribed shipping manifests, and pretended that everything was normal while the covenant ring sat hidden beneath a glove on her left hand, pulsing warmth against her skin in a steady rhythm that matched the heartbeat of a man 3 floors above her. In the evenings, she climbed the stairs to his chambers. They did not speak of what had happened the first night. The wolf episode, the ring's intervention, his confession about Ashen Mane. It sat between them like a third presence, acknowledged by neither, ignored by both. Instead, they existed beside each other in careful, negotiated silence. Anwen read on her bedroll, which had been upgraded sometime during the second day to include a thicker mat, a proper pillow, and a woolen blanket that smelled faintly of cedar. She did not mention the upgrades. He did not acknowledge them. But on the third night, a small table appeared beside her bedroll. With a candle and a cup of water, and Anwen bit the inside of her cheek, hard enough to taste copper, so she wouldn't smile. "The table is nice," she said casually. "What table?" Kadric asked without looking up. "The one that apparently materialized from thin air beside my bed. Furniture does that sometimes. Does it? Ancient castle. Mysterious forces." Anwen pressed her lips together. "And the pillow? Did the mysterious forces provide that as well?" Kadric turned a page of his report. "I have no idea what you are talking about." The ring glowed warm against her palm, and Anwen stopped fighting the smile. On the third evening, she brought bread from the kitchens. Not for herself. She had noticed that Kadric worked through supper most nights, and by the time food arrived from the kitchens, it was cold and ignored. So she wrapped a warm roll in cloth and left it on the corner of his desk without a word. He did not acknowledge it. But when she glanced over 20 minutes later, the bread was gone, and there were crumbs on his report. The next night, she left 2 rolls. They vanished in 15 minutes. On the 5th night, she left a roll with butter and a small pot of honey, and caught him licking his thumb when he thought she wasn't looking. "The bread is good," he said to his documents. "What bread?" Anwen replied, not looking up from her book. Something that might have been a laugh escaped him, quiet and surprised, like a creature that had forgotten how to make the sound. On the 4th night, Anwen could not sleep. The floor was still hard, despite the upgrades, and her mind would not quiet. She lay in the dark and listened to Kadric's breathing, which had taken on the careful, measured quality she now recognized as him fighting to stay awake. "You can sleep," she said softly. "The ring seems to keep the episodes away when I am in the room." A long silence. "How do you know that?" he asked. "Because you have not had one since the first night." Another silence. This one heavier. "You've been watching," he said. "I have been observing," Anwen corrected. "Archivists observe. It is literally what we do." She heard something that might have been a breath of amusement. Then his breathing changed, deepened, and within minutes, the rigid silhouette she could just barely see against the window relaxed into sleep. She watched him for a while in the dark, her chest tight with something she was not ready to name. On the 6th night, the wolf came back. Not violently, not the tearing, agonizing eruption of the first episode. This was different. Kadric was asleep, his breathing deep and even, when Anwen felt the ring warm against her hand, not the gentle pulse she had grown accustomed to, something stronger, deeper, a vibration that reached into her bones and hummed there like a tuning fork struck against stone. She sat up and looked toward the bed. In the dim firelight, she could see the faintest shimmer beneath Kadric's skin. Amber light, tracing the lines of his veins, running along his forearms and up his neck, like liquid fire. His face was peaceful. Whatever was happening was not hurting him. The ring pulled. There was no other word for it. Something in the band reached toward the shimmer in Kadric's veins, and Anwen felt it beneath her breastbone, a tug that was both physical and not like a thread connecting her ribcage to his. She crossed the room without deciding to, stood beside his bed, looked down at the light tracing patterns beneath his skin, and slowly, carefully, placed her hand over his heart. The ring answered. The glow in his veins surged toward her palm, gathering beneath her fingers like warmth pooling in cupped hands. And through the contact, through the bond, through whatever impossible connection the ring had forged between them, Anwen felt him. Not Kadric, ashen mane. The wolf was vast and ancient, and unbearably sad. She sensed his exhaustion like a physical weight, his longing to run, to howl, to exist in the way he was meant to exist. He was not dying of illness. He was dying of grief, buried under the weight of something Kadric carried that was too heavy for both of them. The wolf had been drowning in his king's sorrow, and no one had known, because no one had thought to reach for him. Anwen reached, not with her hands, with something deeper, something the ring unlocked in her that she did not have a name for. She reached for Ashen Mane the way you reach for someone lost in the dark, with hope and intention, and the desperate, stubborn refusal to let go. The wolf stirred. A warmth flooded through her, wild and fierce and alive, and beneath her hand, Kaedric's heartbeat surged and steadied and grew strong. The glow in his veins brightened, responded once in time with her own heartbeat, and then settled into something steady, something that felt like it belonged. Anwen pulled her hand back slowly, her fingers trembling. Kaedric slept on, oblivious, his face softer than she had ever seen it. And somewhere, deep inside him, a wolf lifted his head for the first time in months. Miravel's examination room smelled of dried sage and old paper, and the court healer herself smelled faintly of both, mixed with something sharper that Anwen suspected was medicinal alcohol. "Sit," Miravel instructed, gesturing to a stool. Anwen sat. The healer was a compact woman, with iron-gray hair cropped close to her skull and eyes that missed nothing. She had been the first person Tavian told about the king's condition, and in 8 months she had not found a single remedy that helped. She looked at Anwen now, the way a woman looks at an equation that has suddenly solved itself without showing its work. "Your left hand, please." Anwen extended it. The covenant ring gleamed in the examination room's pale light, and Miravel studied it with clinical intensity, turning Anwen's hand this way and that, pressing 2 fingers against the pulse point at her wrist. "Your heart rate elevates when you are near him," Miravel observed. "I am aware," Anwen said, her face warming. "And the ring's luminosity increases in proportion to emotional proximity. Physical contact accelerates the effect dramatically." Miravel released her hand and made a note on the parchment in front of her. "I reviewed the Covenant archives. The ring was designed to facilitate the mate bond. Its function is to bridge the gap between a bonded pair and amplify their connection." She paused, looked at Anwen over the top of her notes. "The king's wolf is responding to you." "I know," Anwen said. "I felt him 2 nights ago." Miravel's pen stopped moving. "You felt the wolf directly?" "Through the ring. When I touched his chest, I could feel Ashen Mane. He was exhausted and sad, and buried under something heavy, but he was alive." The healer set down her pen with the careful deliberation of someone processing information that changed everything she thought she knew. "The bond is not merely genuine," Miravel said slowly. "It is the only thing keeping his wolf alive. The ring knew. That is why it chose you." The words landed behind Anwen's ribs like a stone dropped into deep water. "But the ring's effect is limited by distance and duration," Miravel continued, her tone shifting to something more clinical. "The data from the past week shows a clear pattern. The king's vitals stabilize when you are within arm's reach. They improve significantly with direct physical contact." She paused, letting the implication hang. "Sleeping on a bedroll across the room is not going to be sufficient." Anwen stared at her. "You are suggesting I sleep in his bed?" "I am stating a medical fact," Miravel replied. "The closer you are, the stronger the effect. Skin contact appears to be the most powerful catalyst. If you want to keep his wolf alive, proximity is not optional." That evening, Anwen stood in Kaedric's chambers and stared at the bed like it was a battlefield. It was enormous. Dark wood, carved posts, sheets the color of deep water. The bedroll had been removed. In its place, on the left side of the massive mattress, someone had laid out a folded nightgown and a second pillow. "Miravel spoke with you?" Anwen said to the king's back. He was at the window again. His preferred position for conversations he did not want to have. She did. "And you agreed?" "I agreed with her medical assessment." His voice was measured, controlled. "This is a practical arrangement, nothing more." "Of course," Anwen said, her throat dry. "Practical." She changed in the dressing room with hands that shook so badly she fumbled the buttons of her work dress 3 times. The nightgown was soft, fine woven cotton that fell to her ankles, and she suspected it had not come from the servant's closet. She did not ask where it came from. She did not want to know if the king had selected fabric for her nightclothes, because the answer, either way, would undo her. She emerged. He was already in the bed, positioned on the far right side, with his back to the center, a deliberate fortress of distance, despite sharing the same mattress. He had removed his shirt. Anwen saw the broad planes of his back in the firelight, the way his muscles tensed when he heard her footsteps, and she forgot briefly how breathing worked. She climbed in. The mattress dipped under her weight, and she lay rigidly on her back, as close to the edge as she could manage, without falling off, staring at the canopy above them. The ring responded warmly, traitorously. "You are very far away," Kadric observed. "I am being respectful of your personal space. You are nearly on the floor. I have excellent balance." A beat of silence. Then, quietly, Miravel said, "Skin contact." Anwen's heart hammered against her ribs. She did say that. Another silence. She could sense the heat of him from 2 feet away, could smell the deep cedar and rain scent that clung to his skin, and stirred something restless inside her. She did not have a wolf. She was not a shifter. She had never felt so much as a flicker of the beast that lived inside every member of the pack. And yet, in these past days, something had been waking inside her. Something that responded to Kadric's presence the way a compass responds to north. Something that pressed against the inside of her skin when he was near, and retreated when he was gone. She reached across the dark and found his hand. His fingers were warm, rough with calluses. They closed around hers with a gentleness that contradicted everything she knew about the Wolf of Dunmeryn. The ring brightened softly between their palms, and she felt the connection settle beneath her breastbone like a second heartbeat. "Better?" she asked. "Better," he said, and his voice was different in the dark, softer. Stripped of rank and title and the weight of a kingdom, just a man, holding a woman's hand, grateful not to be alone. They lay like that, connected by their clasped hands, listening to each other breathe. "Tell me something," he said. "What kind of something?" "Anything. You talk and I sleep. It works." Anwen smiled in the dark. "Is that a compliment or an insult?" "Yes," she laughed, quiet and surprised, and felt his fingers tighten around hers. She told him about the archives, about the mouse that lived behind the third shelf in the eastern stacks that she had named Lord Pemberton because of his dignified waddle, about the time she had accidentally shelved an entire quarter's tax records upside down and spent 3 days fixing it before anyone noticed, about the way the lower archives smelled like old leather and dust and possibility, and how she had loved it there, loved being invisible, loved the quiet, orderly world of numbers and records, where everything had a place and nothing demanded more of her than competence. His breathing deepened as she spoke, his grip loosened but did not release. "Lord Pemberton," he murmured, half asleep. "Distinguished name for a mouse." "He earned it," Anwen whispered. "He was asleep within minutes." And the ring between their palms glowed warm and steady, and she could feel Ashenmane stirring beneath the surface, stronger tonight, closer, reaching toward her through the bond, like a flame reaching toward air. Sometime before dawn, she woke to find him curled around her. His arm was draped across her waist, his chest pressed against her back. His face was tucked against the curve of her neck, and each slow exhale sent warmth cascading down her shoulder. The ring was blazing on her finger, and everywhere their skin touched, the bond hummed between them, like a live wire. His hand rested against her waist, warm even through the cotton of her nightgown, and the contact sent warmth spreading through her that she could not control. She felt his heartbeat against her shoulder blade, felt Ashenmane vast and warm and wild, pressing toward her through the bond with something that felt like recognition, like joy, like home. Anwen lay perfectly still and tried to remember why this was supposed to be practical. Her heart was not interested in practical. Her heart was interested in the way his arm tightened around her in sleep, holding her closer, and the low, contented sound he made against her hair. Then he woke. She felt the change immediately. His breathing sharpened, his body went rigid against hers. The absent dreaming gentleness vanished, replaced by sudden acute awareness of exactly where his hands were. He did not pull away. For 3 stuttering heartbeats, he stayed exactly where he was, his arm tightened around her waist, his face pressed deeper into the curve of her neck. She felt him inhale, slow and deliberate, drawing her scent into his lungs. A sound escaped his throat, low, aching. The sound of a man who had found something he was terrified of losing. Then his hand found her jaw, turned her face toward his. In the gray pre-dawn light, his eyes were silver, human and burning, and his mouth was so close she could feel the warmth of his breath on her lips. "Anwen," he said, and her name sounded like a prayer. Her heart stopped. Then the door opened. Tavian's voice cut through the room like a blade. "Sire, the council is convening early. Councillor Voss is demanding an answer about the Covenant trial." Kadric pulled back so fast, the mattress lurched. He was on his feet, his back to her, one hand dragging through his hair. "Tell them I'll be there within the hour." The door closed. Anwen lay in the tangled sheets, hard hammering, the ghost of his breath still warm on her lips. The ring answered once, bright and insistent, like a question she was terrified to answer. The council chamber was a room designed to make people feel small. Vaulted ceilings, iron chandeliers, a table long enough to seat 30 men who all believed their opinion mattered most. Anwen had never been inside it, and standing at the threshold now, she wished that streak had continued. Tavian had summoned her 40 minutes after the king left. "The council wants to see the ring," he said. No further explanation. She walked in and felt every gaze in the room turn toward her, like arrows finding a target. 15 counselors seated along the table, minor nobles, military advisors, and at the far end, King Kadric, his face carved from stone, utterly unreadable. Beside him sat the woman from the ceremony, the one who had dropped the ring, Lady Vinitha Harrowhall. Tall and elegant, her dark hair swept into the same architectural arrangement, her emerald gown replaced by one of deeper forest green. Her posture spoke of a lifetime spent in rooms exactly like this one, and her cool, measuring gaze gave away nothing. Councillor Voss rose from his chair. "This is the woman." He said it the way one might say, "This is the stain." "This is Miss Anwen," Tavian corrected evenly. "The Covenant ring selected her during the ceremony." "The ring fell off a cushion and she caught it," Voss countered. "That is not selection. That is accident." Murmurs rippled down the table. Lady Vinitha watched Anwen with patient, unreadable eyes. "Show them the ring," Tavian said quietly. Anwen removed her glove. The Covenant ring caught the chandelier light and glowed soft gold against her skin. She sensed it, responding to the room, to the tension, to the proximity of Kadric 12 feet away. It warmed in time with the heartbeat she felt through the bond, steady and strong. "The ring has not dimmed or cooled since it bonded to her hand," Tavian continued. "It cannot be removed. And the king's health has improved significantly during the trial period." The room went very still at the mention of the king's health. Anwen saw several counselors exchange sharp glances. They didn't know the details, she realized. They knew something was wrong, but not what. Voss leaned forward. "Improved health is a vague claim, my Lord Beta. The Covenant ring is a symbol, not a medical instrument. The fact remains that this woman is a commoner, a record keeper from the lower archives. She has no family name, no bloodline, no political value whatsoever." Each word landed like a small, precise blade. "Meanwhile," Voss continued, gesturing toward the woman in green, "Lady Vinitha Harrowhall has traveled 3 weeks to honor the alliance between House Harrowhall and the Crown. An alliance that depends, I remind this council, on a marriage." Lady Vinitha inclined her head with the practiced modesty of someone who had already been told she had won. Anwen looked at Kadric. He was watching Voss with an expression she could not read. His jaw was tight, his hands were flat on the table. He had not looked at her once since she entered the room. "The ring dimmed slightly," and the ache behind her ribs had nothing to do with magic. "The trial will continue," Cedric said. His voice was flat, toneless, a king's voice, designed to end discussion without inviting debate. Voss opened his mouth, closed it. The council shifted uncomfortably. Lady Venetha smiled, the kind of smile that said she could afford to be patient. Anwen was dismissed. She walked back through the corridors, with the sound of her own heartbeat in her ears, and a cold, spreading numbness in her body. She had stood in a room full of powerful men and been weighed and measured, and found to have no value whatsoever. And the king had sat there and said nothing, had not defended her, had not looked at her, had simply extended the trial like she was an experiment he hadn't finished running. She returned to the archives. She shelved ledgers. She transcribed manifests. She did not cry, because crying required admitting that something had been lost, and she was not ready to admit that the warmth she had felt in his chambers, in his bed, in the circle of his arms that morning, had meant anything at all. That evening, she climbed the stairs to his rooms as usual. The routine, she told herself. Just the routine. The door was open. She stepped inside and stopped. Cedric stood in the center of the room, not at the window. Standing in the open, facing the door, like he had been waiting for her, like he had been pacing. "The council does not decide who I take as a mate," he said. No preamble, no greeting. Anwen blinked at him. "I did not say they did." "You're thinking it." "I am thinking many things, Your Majesty." He flinched. It was barely perceptible. Just a tightening around his eyes, but she saw it. "You have not called me that in days." She had not. Somewhere between the fourth and fifth night, she had stopped using his title in the privacy of these rooms, had started using his name, had not noticed the shift until now. "Perhaps I should resume," she said, "given the circumstances." He crossed the room in 4 strides, stopped an arm's length from her. His eyes were silver in the firelight, and the raw, unguarded desperation in them cracked something open beneath her ribs. "Don't," he said. "Don't what?" "Don't pull away from me." The words cost him something. She could see it in the way his throat worked, the way his hands opened and closed at his sides. The king of the realm, the Wolf of Dunmerran, was standing in front of an archivist and asking her not to leave. Anwen felt her eyes burn. "What about Lady Venetha?" she asked. "What about the alliance?" "I will handle the alliance." "And the council?" "I will handle the council." "And the fact that I am no one, that I have no name, no family, no bloodline, no political value whatsoever?" She threw Voss's words back at him, and they tasted like poison. Cedric's expression shattered. Not slowly, all at once, like glass hitting stone. "You are not no one," he said, and his voice broke on the word. "You are the only person who has ever reached my wolf. You are the only reason I have slept in 8 months. You are the only. He stopped, swallowed hard. His hands were shaking. Anwen reached for him. Her fingers found his jaw, tilting his face down toward hers. He leaned into the touch with a desperation that made her heart crack. "Then tell them that," she whispered. "Tell the council what I am to you." His eyes closed. A muscle jumped beneath her fingertips. "I cannot," he said. The 2 words fell between them like a door slamming shut. "Not yet," he added quickly, his hand coming up to cover hers. "If the court discovers how weak my wolf has become, the territories will fracture. Venetha's house commands the northern border. Without the alliance, we lose the only military buffer between Dunmerran and the Grymark remnants. If I reject her publicly for a woman with no political standing, her father will march south within a month." Anwen pulled her hand back. The cold returned, sharper now. "So I stay in your bed in secret while you negotiate a marriage to another woman." "Anwen, that is not what I am saying." "It is exactly what you are saying." He reached for her. She stepped back. "I need time," he said, his voice cracking at the edges. "I need to find another way to secure the alliance before I can make this public. If I move too fast, Everything falls apart. She looked at him for a long moment. At the desperation in his eyes. At the man who was trying to hold a kingdom together, with hands that couldn't stop shaking. She understood the impossible position he was in. She understood the politics, the stakes, the terrible calculus of ruling. But understanding did not stop the ache. "All right," she said quietly. "I will stay." They went to bed in silence. His hand found hers in the dark. She let him hold it because refusing would hurt them both. And because, despite everything, the warmth of his fingers around hers still felt like the only honest thing in her world. She did not sleep. At 2:30, she rose silently. Cadric was deep in the most peaceful sleep she had given him, his face soft and young and unburdened. She stood over him and watched him breathe, and memorized the sight because she knew, with a certainty that went beyond reason, that she would not see it again. She was not angry. She was not bitter. She simply understood what he would not say, aloud, that she could never be his queen, that every night she spent in his bed was borrowed time, that the longer she stayed, the harder it would be when the inevitable came, and it would come. Vanitha's smile in the council chamber had told her that. Voss's measured contempt had told her that. And Cadric's silence, his beautiful, agonized, honest silence, had told her most of all. He needed the alliance. He needed the northern border. He needed to survive. And surviving meant a queen who brought armies, not an archivist who brought catalogued grain records and warm bread wrapped in cloth. Anwen slipped her hand from his. His brow furrowed in sleep. His fingers twitched, reaching for contact that was no longer there. But the deep sleep held him, the ring's residual warmth sustaining it just long enough. She dressed in the dark, moved through the room like a ghost, collecting nothing, leaving everything. She paused at the door and looked back one last time. The ring blazed on her finger, bright and burning and full of everything she could not say. She pressed her hand against her chest, willing the light to dim, willing the bond to quiet, willing her heart to stop screaming at her to go back. She opened the door, stepped into the corridor, and disappeared into the dark. By dawn she was gone, and so was the ring. Cadric woke, reaching for her. His hands swept across the sheets, searching for warmth that was not there. His fingers found cold linen, cold pillow, cold absence where she had been. He sat up. The room was gray with early light, and the silence was the wrong kind. Not the comfortable quiet of shared sleep, but the hollow, ringing emptiness of a space that had been vacated. The nightgown lay folded neatly on the chair. The candle on her table was extinguished, the wick still faintly warm. The cloth she used to wrap his bread sat empty on the corner of his desk. She was gone. Anwen. His voice came out rough, cracked with sleep and the first razor edge of panic. He was on his feet before the name finished, leaving his mouth, crossing the room, checking the dressing room, the corridor, the antechamber. Empty. The ring. She had taken the ring. He felt it now. Or rather, he felt its absence. A hole in the center of his chest where the ring's warmth had lived for almost 2 weeks. The bond was still there, thin and stretched like wire pulled taut, vibrating with distance and getting weaker by the second. Ashenmane collapsed. The wolf, who had been stirring, growing stronger, pressing toward the surface with something like hope for the first time in months, simply folded. Cadric felt it happen, a sickening lurch inside his chest, like a floor giving way. He staggered, caught himself against the bedpost, and pressed a hand over his heart. "No," he breathed, "not now." Tavian found him like that. 15 minutes later, white-knuckled and sweating, gripping the bedpost like it was the only thing keeping him upright. "She's gone," Cadric said before the beta could speak. "Find her." Tavian took one look at the king's face and left without asking a single question. Within the hour, riders had been dispatched through every gate. Guards searched the grounds, the lower levels, the archives. Miravel was summoned, took one look at Cadric's vitals, and sent everyone out of the room. "How long since she left?" the healer asked, pressing her fingers to his wrist. Hours. I don't know. She must have gone in the night. Your pulse is erratic. The wolf, fading. Faster than before. Miravel's expression tightened. The bond was stabilizing him. With her gone and the ring gone, the withdrawal will be severe. You need her back. I am aware, Kydrick said through his teeth. By midday, the search had turned up nothing. Anwen had not taken a horse, had not been seen at any gate, had not left through any passage the guards knew. She had simply vanished, slipped through the castle like water through a cracked stone. The council convened without being summoned. Voss stood at the head of the table and spoke in measured tones about the Covenant ring's disappearance, about the security implications of a priceless royal artifact, leaving the castle on the hand of a commoner, about theft. Kydrick endured 3 sentences of it before his fist hit the table hard enough to crack the wood. She did not steal it, he snarled, and the sound that came out was not entirely human. Every man in the room went still. The ring bonded to her because she is my mate, Kydrick said, and the words tore out of him like something that had been caged for too long. She is my fated mate, and my wolf is dying, and if I do not find her, I will die. Is that clear enough for this council? The silence that followed was absolute. Lady Vinetha, seated 3 chairs down, rose without a word and left the room. Her silk whispered against the stone floor, and the door closed behind her with a soft, final click. Kydrick braced both hands against the cracked table and breathed through the tremor running through his body. Ashen Mon was a whisper now, a candle flame in a gale, flickering and fading. Tavian appeared at his side. Sire, we've tracked her movements to the northern trade road. She's on foot, heading toward the Greymark borderlands. The Greymark borderlands. The words hit Kydrick like a physical blow. Of all the directions she could have gone, she had walked straight toward the place that haunted every nightmare he had ever had. Bring my horse, he said. He rode north. He rode through the afternoon and into the evening, pushing the horse hard, following the thin, fading thread of the bond like a man following a candle through fog. It pulled at him, directional and desperate, growing weaker with every mile. Ashenmane stirred once, just once, a faint surge of instinct that pressed against Kydrick's consciousness with a single burning imperative. Find her. He found her at dusk, in a shepherd's bothy on the edge of the Greymark foothills, curled on the dirt floor with her arms wrapped around her chest. She looked worse than he had ever seen her. Pale, gaunt, her lips tinged blue with cold, despite the mild evening air. The ring blazed on her finger, pouring radiance into the cramped dark space, but its warmth was clearly not reaching her. The bond, stretched to breaking over 40 miles of road, was tearing her apart. Anwen. He was on his knees beside her in an instant, pulling her into his arms, pressing her against his chest. The moment they touched, the ring surged so bright, it turned the bothy walls to gold. Ashenmane lunged forward with a force that nearly knocked Kydrick sideways. The wolf rising, reaching, howling silently toward the warmth that was finally close enough to feel. Anwen's eyes opened. They were glassy, unfocused, and when they found his face, they filled with tears. You shouldn't have come, she whispered. You shouldn't have left, he replied, his voice wrecked. You need the alliance. You need someone who matters. You matter. He pressed his forehead against hers, his hands cradling her face, and his voice came out shattered. You matter, more than the alliance, more than the border, more than any of it. Do you understand? I would rather lose every territory in this kingdom than lose you. You can't mean that, she said. You're the king. You don't get to choose me over the kingdom. Watch me. She shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. Kydrick, I left because I saw the truth in that council room when Voss spoke, and you said nothing. I understood. I will always be the archivist who caught a ring. I will never be enough. The words broke something open in him. Not anger, something older and deeper, a wound he had been carrying so long he had forgotten it was there. You want to know why my wolf is dying? He asked. Anwen went still in his arms. It is not a curse. It is not an illness. His voice was barely above a whisper, now scraped raw. 3 years ago, I put down the Greymark Rebellion. The last stronghold was a mountain fortress. We couldn't breach it, couldn't wait them out. So I ordered fire. His hands trembled against her face. Ashenmane carried the torch, in wolf form. We were supposed to burn the fortress and nothing else. But the wind shifted. He swallowed. The muscle in his jaw jumped. There was a village in the valley below, Millhaven, 43 families. The fire reached them before anyone could stop it. Anwen's breath caught. I tried, Kadric said, and his voice cracked clean in half. I shifted. I ran. But by the time I reached the valley, the houses were already burning. I pulled 9 people out of the flames. 9 out of over 100. And when I shifted back, when I looked at my own hands and smelled the smoke in my fur, I couldn't bear it. He pressed his eyes shut. I couldn't bear that Ashenmane was the weapon that did it, that I was the one who gave the order. So I shut him out. Not deliberately, but something inside me closed a door and I couldn't open it again. Every time I reach for him, I smell smoke. I see the valley. I hear them screaming. He opened his eyes. They were wet. My wolf is dying because I decided I didn't deserve him. Because I decided the part of me that could do that could burn a village full of innocent people, didn't deserve to exist. Anwen stared at him. The ring between them throbbed once, slow and deep, like a heart breaking. And, you think I am not enough? She said, her voice thick with tears. You think I left because I don't matter? Kadric, I have spent my entire life believing I don't deserve to take up space. I was left on the castle steps, as a baby. No name, no family, no explanation. Just a blanket and the cold. His arms tightened around her. I grew up invisible, because invisible was safe. If no one sees you, no one can leave you. If you don't need anything, no one can take it away. Her voice broke. I left your bed because I believed what Voss said, that I have no value. That I am nothing. You are everything, Kadric said, and the words came out fierce and broken and absolute. Anwen, you are everything. She pressed her face into his chest and sobbed. He held her on the dirt floor of a shepherd's bothy at the edge of the Greymark borderlands, the ring blazing between them, and felt something inside him shift, not break, not shatter. Shift, like a door opening that had been sealed for 3 years. Like a wolf lifting his head in the dark and seeing light for the first time. They stayed on the floor of the bothy for a long time. Kagadric's back against the rough stone wall, Anwen cradled against his chest, the ring casting warm light across them both in slow, steady pulses that matched their breathing. Millhaven, Anwen said quietly. You carry that every day? Every day, Kadric confirmed. His chin rested on top of her head, his arms wrapped around her. And you decided Ashenmane was a monster. He followed my command. The torch, the fire, it was my order. He was the instrument, but I was the hand. Anwen pulled back far enough to look at him. In the ring's warm glow, she could see every line of grief carved into his face, every sleepless night. Every morning he had woken and reached for a wolf who wouldn't answer. He wasn't a monster, she said. He was loyal. He trusted you, and you punished him for it. Kadric flinched. The words were not gentle. She had not meant them to be. You punished yourself too, she continued. You've been standing in front of that fire for 3 years, burning alive alongside those people, because you think you deserve to be there. 43 families. Anwen. And it was a tragedy, an awful, terrible tragedy that you caused and that you tried to stop and that you have never stopped paying for. She took his face in her hands, forcing him to look at her. But killing your wolf will not bring them back. Destroying yourself will not undo the fire. All it does is add one more death to the count. His breathing had gone ragged. The light from the ring was quickening now, responding to the raw, cracked open honesty pouring between them. You told me I'm not no one. Anwen said, that I matter. And I am choosing to believe you, even though every instinct I have says otherwise. Because you said it and you meant it. She paused. Now I need you to believe the same thing about yourself. You are not the fire. You are not the worst thing you have ever done. And Ashen Mane is not a weapon. He is part of you. The best part. The part that ran into the flames and pulled 9 people out when he could have turned away. Kydrick's eyes were streaming. Let him come back, Anwen whispered. Please, let him come home. The ring ignited. Not a pulse. Not a glow. A detonation of light that flooded the bothy and poured through the cracks in the walls, turning the twilight hillside into daybreak. Anwen gasped, her hand flying to her chest, because she could feel it through the bond. Ashen Mane. Not a whisper, not a flicker, a roar. The wolf surged forward with a force that shook Kydrick's entire body. His eyes blazed gold, pure and bright and alive, and a sound tore from his chest that was both a sob and a howl. His hands gripped Anwen's arms, and she could feel the transformation rippling beneath his skin, not fighting this time, not tearing him apart, rising, like a tide, like the sun. I'm here, Anwen said, gripping him back. Let him come. Kydrick threw his head back and shifted. The transformation was violent and beautiful, and utterly unlike anything she had ever witnessed. Bone and muscle and sinew reshaped themselves in a cascade of radiance, and where a man had been, a wolf stood, massive, black-furred eyes, like molten amber, burning with intelligence and grief and fierce. Ashen Mane looked at Anwen, and she felt it. Through the bond, through the ring, through every fiber of the connection between them. The wolf saw her, knew her, had been reaching for her from the dark for months, following the warmth of her presence through the walls of a prison his king had built around them both. The wolf lowered his great head and pressed his muzzle against her palm. Anwen burst into tears. She sank her fingers into the thick black fur of his neck and held on while the wolf breathed, deep and steady and free. The light from the ring dimmed slowly, settling into a constant quiet glow, and the bond between them sang with something that felt permanent, complete, unbreakable. Ashen Mane shifted back. The transformation was gentler this time, smoother, and when Kydrick knelt before her in human form again, his face was open in a way she had never seen, stripped of every wall, every title, every barrier he had ever built. Just a man on his knees looking at the woman who had brought his wolf home. Anwen, he said, and the word carried more weight than any crown. She kissed him. She surged forward and pressed her mouth to his, and the kiss was salt and heat and relief and 3 years of unshed grief pouring out between them. His hands came up to cradle her face, tilting her head, deepening the kiss until there was no space between them. No air, no separation of any kind. Stay, he breathed against her lips. Stay with me, not because of the ring, not because of my wolf, because I am asking you, because I love you. You love me, Anwen repeated, her voice shaking. I love you. He said it like a confession and a vow, and an anchor thrown into deep water. I have loved you since you told me furniture materializes on its own. She laughed through her tears, and the sound was the most beautiful thing he had ever heard. I love you too, she said. I loved you when you talked about Ashen Mine in the dark. I loved you when you fell asleep, holding my hand. I loved you when you ate the bread I left on your desk and pretended you didn't know where it came from. I never pretended. You absolutely pretended. The bread was exceptional. I was preserving your humility. She kissed him again, softer this time, slower, and felt the bond between them deepen with each second of contact. The ring hummed against his skin where her hand rested on his chest, and the warmth that spread through them both was vast and sure. What followed was tender and overwhelming and nothing she could have prepared for. He held her like she was the most precious thing he had ever touched, and she held him back with equal fierceness. And the bond between them deepened with every second of contact, until the boundaries between them dissolved entirely. And, when he pressed his mouth to the curve of her neck and marked her, the bond snapped into place with a force that shook them both to the core. Light poured through them, binding wolf to mate, king to partner, broken man to the woman who had reached into his darkness and refused to let go. Anwen marked him back, instinct, pure and primal. And she felt the bond lock on both sides, felt Ashenmane howl in triumph through the connection, felt everything that had been fractured and fragile and held together with desperation finally become whole. They lay together afterward, tangled and breathless, his forehead resting against hers. "The council will lose their minds," Anwen murmured. "Let them. Voss will have a stroke. I will send flowers." She laughed, and a sound filled the small space like music. Kydrick pulled her closer, wrapping himself around her the way he had in sleep, except this time he was awake and choosing it. And the difference between the two was everything. "The alliance," she said softly. "The northern border. I will find another way," he said. "I have already been thinking about it. Fanitha's father wants security. I can offer military support without a marriage. It will take negotiation, but it is possible. You have been thinking about it." He pressed his lips to her temple. "Since the second night. Since you told me about the mouse named Lord Pemberton, and I realized I was never going to be able to let you go." Anwen closed her eyes and let herself be held. The ring glowed between them, steady and warm and quiet now. Its work done. The bond hummed beneath her breastbone like a second heartbeat, and through it she sensed Ashenmane, vast and content and finally at peace. Outside, the stars came out over the Greymark Hills, and inside the bothy, the king slept with his mate in his arms and did not dream of fire. 3 months later, Anwen stood at the top of the great staircase in Dunmerran and looked out over a hall full of people who were trying very hard to pretend they had always supported the match. The wedding had been Tavian's idea. A full royal ceremony, he had argued, would do more to legitimize the bond than any quiet announcement. Give them spectacle, give them something to celebrate, make it undeniable. It was undeniable. Anwen wore a gown the color of deep gold, because Miravel had insisted and because the seamstress had wept when she saw how the fabric matched the ring's glow. The covenant ring sat on her finger, polished and warm and quiet these days, brightening only when Kydrick touched her, which he did often, and with a lack of subtlety that made Tavian roll his eyes. The alliance with House Harrowhall had been renegotiated. Not a marriage, but a military pact, sealed with trade concessions and border garrisons, and a personal letter from Kydrick to Lord Harrowhall that Anwen suspected contained language far more diplomatic than anything the king had ever said aloud. Venetha had departed gracefully, which surprised everyone, and had sent a wedding gift of northern silk that surprised them even more. Councillor Voss had not had a stroke, despite Kydrick's best efforts. He had, however, developed a persistent twitch in his left eyelid whenever Anwen entered the council chamber, which she chose to interpret as a sign of deep respect. The lower archives had not replaced her. Anwen still descended to the third sublevel 3 mornings a week to catalogue shipment records and visit Lord Pemberton, who had grown fat on the crumbs she left behind the third shelf. Kydrick had offered to appoint her to any position in the court she wanted, and she had chosen the one she already had. "Someone has to keep the grain records in order," she told him. "Otherwise, the kingdom falls apart." He had looked at her with such naked adoration that Tavian had excused himself from the room. Now, standing at the top of the stairs, Anwen felt a familiar warmth press against her back, arms wrapped around her waist. A chin settled on top of her head. "You're staring at the hall like it might attack you," Kydrick murmured. "It might. Voss is down there. I will protect you from Voss, my hero." He laughed, low and warm, and the sound vibrated through her spine. A Shenmanine stirred contentedly through the bond, a lazy, satisfied presence that had spent the past 3 months relearning what it felt like to be whole. The wolf ran every night now, wild and free, through the Dinmarin forests, and when Kydrick returned at dawn, smelling of pine and rain and joy, Anwen was always waiting. She turned in his arms and looked up at him. The hollows in his cheeks had filled, the bruises beneath his eyes were gone. He looked younger than she had ever seen him, bright-eyed and rested, and so devastatingly handsome it still made her breath catch. "Ready?" she asked. He took her hand. The ring warmed once between their palms, sure and golden and steady. "With you," he said, "always." They descended the staircase together, hand in hand, into the light,